Greetings, everyone. Today, we're super excited and honored to have Nass, who previously worked at Andreessen Horowitz as Chief Information Security Officer. He is also a phenomenal engineer and security leader with a proven track record in blockchain and infrastructure. So, hi, Nass. Welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, your
Hey,
background, and what your main focus is?
yeah, that sounds great. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor and very excited to chat about all the things that we have prepared for this uh, podcast. And so a little bit more about myself. My name is Nassim. You don't need to pronounce the last name way too complex. But it took years of training for myself. But yeah, so I'm currently a co-founder at a stealth startup that I started with my friend and colleague Riaz Boy. We've been just working together for quite a bit of time across 4 different companies. It's going to be the 5th now, and our first founded together. So very
Wow.
excited to kind of release more information in a few months. But prior to that, we
Congrats.
were actually both at Andreessen Horowitz, where I was Chief Information Security Officer. And what this means, it's very interesting. Kind of like technical roles within VC firms are very interesting because they're actually kind of multiple components. The first one is that in the Web3 space, you have quite a bit of things to do that are highly technical in order to run successfully a VC firm that is very involved, in kind of participation to protocols and kind of like custody of assets, etc. And so as a result, I was essentially supporting kind of like security efforts when it came to kind of technical operations, whether that's custody, trading, participation voting to various protocols and so on. Also, tremendous amount of sensitive information to help secure and make sure that the none of the information that shouldn't be revealed remains confidential. But the vast majority of the job is actually external. It's actually the privilege to work with amazing founders and leaders across the entire portfolio of companies that Andreessen Horowitz invests in, to
Mhm.
really support the vision of those amazing founders, right? It's kind of, if you think about OpenSea, if you think about Uniswap, Layer Zero, you name it, all of those companies actually run into a tremendous amount of kind of like security decisions to make at different level, right? Like whether that's at the product, like architecture, hiring, communication, security programs, auditing, incident response, you name it, right? Like there is a gigantic spectrum. And the idea is that it's pretty rare for companies to actually be able to do all of this, especially so early on. And
Mhm.
so I was essentially kind of here to help them support until they could kind of like build this in-house and kind of like help them build the muscle essentially to take on. So that was kind of like what I've been doing for the last like year and a half. Plus, prior to that, I was a tech lead at Facebook on the blockchain project.
Mhm.
There were 2 components as part of it. There was the Novi wallet, right? And there
Okay.
was the Libra blockchain. And
Yep.
so I worked on the Novi wallet. I was actually kind of leading blockchain features and integrations for the wallet, really supporting the infrastructure that was meant to really get Web3 in the hands and crypto in the hands of billions of people. The
Mhm.
US government decided otherwise, but the technology is ready, and hopefully, as soon as like things clear out, hopefully there will be a second life for this project. And prior to that, I was working at Anchorage. I was an early engineer. For those who don't
Mhm.
know, Anchorage is a major crypto custodian in this space, kind of geared towards institutions. And really, the idea is building the safest technology for hedge funds and VC funds, insurance funds, to really have the safest place to put their digital assets uh, while participating to those networks and kind of getting the capturing the upside essentially around those digital assets. So that's essentially my life in the Web3 space. Prior to that, I was at Docker and in Apple in the security teams there. in kind of like more general like Web 2 and cloud and infrastructure as security essentially. I'm also a founder of Rebels.net, which is how to meet you guys. And so I'm extremely passionate about the NFT space. I really believe that we've been limited for a tremendous amount of time by kind of like closed ecosystems,
Yeah.
both from like a experience and product and communities, right? Like everything is like just so closed. Even like on Twitter, we see that with kind of like a very small echo chambers, right? Despite the
Yeah.
number of people
Agree.
being there. And so extremely excited about, building a much more open and interoperable kind of web for tomorrow's infrastructure.
Awesome. Yeah, I've actually seen the NFTs of Rebels by Night. It was so great. Like it's so high quality and yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it took quite a bit of time. I think it took like seven months of like a
Oh wow.
full team of designers essentially to kind of like get that to launch. So yeah,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
tremendous amount of effort.
Since you mentioned, you were working at Facebook on the wallet side, we know that you have a ton of experiences and insights on, wallet security and also account abstraction, MPC wallets and stuff. So I guess today we really want to kind of get in depth on all these technologies and the insights behind it.
Yeah, I guess it's like more general question about what this technology is. And, can you give us a little bit brief introduction about what account abstraction is? We'd love to
Got it.
hear your version of it.
Yeah, that sounds great. So the way I think about account abstraction is, so it's pretty interesting. I think that, there is a certain amount of code that, will run essentially on, people's like devices, whether that's on a browser, whether that's directly on your phone. But at the end of the day, those kind of like integrations are fairly limited to the amount of, essentially uh, to the interfaces that the blockchain provides you, right? And
Hmm.
so the idea is that once you start thinking about an account as more than just a private key, but actually just it has state to it. So if you think about an address, like an email address, right? Like it should have the email address can kind of like live independently from your password, right? Like you don't need, it's not every time that you change your password that you're going to have to change your email address, right? Like the idea is that your email address is this kind of like public facing and publicly addressable um, you know identifier essentially to
Hmm.
get to you. But there should be the ability for you to define more granularly what state you want essentially for, or what functionalities you would want essentially for your own address. And so account abstraction is really that. Account abstraction is kind of building building a level of abstraction for the account where anything that is publicly accessible, uh, is kind of removed from what you want to add as features to it. And so it allows people essentially to rotate their keys without having to rotate their publicly addressable, address, which is absolutely critical, as
Yeah.
anyone here can imagine, right? Like we all know, we all know how emails work, how phones work, etc. But never do we have to change those things every single time that we lose a password, right? And so
Hmm.
the idea is really, that's just like one example, but there are many other examples. Account abstraction can also be used to essentially provide wallet functionality to many people, right? Like one address can actually be orchestrated by multiple people, and provide an additional level of addressability. It can be used to and provide kind of like gasless transactions if the account would be owned, for example, by a business, but the business
Hmm.
has its own users, right? And so the business may want to not force the users to have to know anything about gas, right?
Hmm.
And so really account abstraction is also a way for you as a business to subsidize essentially gas fees for your own users. The idea is that you have those kind of transactions that can include other transactions within them, and your wallet will not understand multiple levels of indirections. within those transactions. And so that's really, at the end of the day, there's just so many things that we can do with account abstraction. I think that it's been like a very big buzzword, in many circles. And I do believe that beyond, kind of like gasless transactions and like retriable transactions, in gas optimizations, key recovery, etc., we have yet to see the full potential of it, right? Because account abstraction actually has been in place for quite a bit of time. A lot of people have been building in the space account abstraction, even though it was not standardized. And I guess like the goal recently with EIP 48337 was really to standardize it so that all the developers can kind of like work in the same direction, right? Just like ERC 721, ERC 1155, etc. So I'm very excited about the future essentially of account abstraction and really pushing as much logic of wallets on chain that makes sense from a privacy perspective, right? And yeah, very excited about all the set of features that people are going to imagine and build.
Right. So for us, it's actually like bringing some of the things that we take for granted in Web 2 to Web 3 to blockchain. So I don't know, out of all those examples, right, we've seen 2FAs, as you said, we've seen wallet recovery, and people are also setting monthly spending limits for accounts, and people using wallet to play blockchain games without frequently signing it. People also building like automatic bill payments and subscriptions. People can pay gas using different assets, and even business can pay for their users. So which one use case do you think we can see first? Or let's say will have the most significant impact to our crypto space, and which one are you most interested in?
So that is a great question, because the vast majority of those things have already been done, and the fact that we're not using those things yet, I think, kind of lies more on the integration, right? Like, how do you expose and kind of like integrate account abstraction like very broadly, right? But also just having that be part of a standard that really gets, because if you think about it, right, like if you have like a Nike, a Disney, or like other companies, and they want to leverage blockchain and they understand, wow, great things are happening in account abstraction, but it's breaking every single week, right? So like every single kind of business or project out there does it differently, right? They're not going to want to essentially go in a direction at the cost of locking themselves into it because, wow, the next one just created a much better feature, right? And so I do believe that what actually will enable adoption is really standardization, because now once you have standardization, it's a lot easier for businesses to realize, I'm not locked in. If I need to kind of like use a different offering, a different product, a different project, I should be able to, right? And so I think that this is actually the main blocker, right? Like, I'm extremely excited about key recovery. I'm extremely excited about seamless transaction relays, where like the users don't need to know about crypto, right? Like that's the most important thing, right? Like, we need to build infrastructure that ends up being invisible to the end users. And so that takes the shape of, being able to click forgot password, being able to have kind of like a seamless Web2 like 2FA. That means also being able to share, an address and make sure that it's never going to change, right? And so all of those things are absolutely critical to have in place, but also integrate really well in a very Web2 native way into the way kind of people interact with technology on a daily basis, right? It's like, the way I always say it is like, the bar for product adoption is, it's TikTok, it's Netflix. Anything that is actually lower than that in terms of usability is not gonna see any adoption, because this is what people do on their phone all day, right? And this is what people are used to. So anything that is lower than that in terms of usability is not going to get adoption. So we need to get there.
I think one of the things that's stopping all those on-chain games, where like ZK game, is that do people have to sign multiple times. And I think I don't know if account abstraction can do like some of the things to deal with that part. You could probably play blockchain games without frequently just signing it. So I think like there's so many like interesting application that we can explore on that part. How do you see the way to promote this technology? Like, is it better for a project that is currently building something? For example, OpenSea or like Uniswap, they have their own wallet, right? Is it better for a founder to build something first and then try to implement the account abstraction wallet technology into it, or there's like entrepreneurs that currently just building the wallet as the product would eventually be the one who start dominate the market? Like, which way do you see is like the better way to approach the market?
Question is mostly targeted for wallet developers, right?
Right.
Okay, that's a great
Developers,
question.
entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do believe that whenever building kind of like wallet solution, you have to think about it very holistically, because if you think about security never lives like on its own, like on a corner of the room, and like, the user experience like works regardless. I think that like the two are always intertwined, right? Like security is about really holistic trade-off between whatever you're protecting and whatever it costs to kind of take advantage of the system. And so in the case of account abstraction, in kind of like, which is the on-chain component, but also off-chain component that is I would say kind of like the actual wallet, right? There needs to be very tight integration that really works seamlessly from a feature perspective, but also a security perspective. And so if like this integration is kind of like an afterthought in the way you've designed your solution as kind of like a wallet developer, you probably didn't make the right trade-offs when it comes to security. That's kind of like nature of it. And so I would advise people to kind of like have a very holistic view of the system, and the system will contain both kind of like on-chain component, off-chain component. If you have key recovery, those should be things that work really well, essentially, with like in terms of establishing trust, for example, with off-chain components. I'm gonna give it like a very simple example, right? Like if you have a key recovery, right, then you have, let's say you have Taiko and Jojo, who both want to come together to unlock transactions. It's kind of like it works almost as a 2FA, and you two guys need to come together to approve those transactions. There needs to be, this policy needs to be established at some point, right? Like you need to say, hey, only Taiko and Jojo needs to come together. And so this piece requires some form of integration with off-chain components. So those things like never leave like separately. They actually always work together, and it's extremely important to have those two things kind of built from the ground up with this integration in mind. Though transparently, I've seen a lot of companies out there essentially leverage existing solutions on the on-chain part after having built the off-chain part. So if you think about 0x sequence, or like even like Alchemy has kind of like Paymaster and kind of like gas optimization and other capabilities from an account abstraction standpoint, I really do believe that the on-chain component is probably going to become like an open source kind of commodity at some point, just like Kubernetes for like cloud software. And it's just going to be a very kind of like standard piece of software that anyone can integrate with and kind of like run on their own infrastructure. If I'm trying to kind of like look at it from the like long-term lens, I really do believe that this component is probably going to be an absolute kind of standard, and everyone is going to end up using the same to be compliant, or whatever the future of this space requires.
So thanks for the answers. So TK kind of brought the questions on the use cases and kind of the future potential of account abstraction. So I actually have a couple questions, I guess, more on the security side of account abstractions. You mentioned that, account recovery and seamless wallet setup are some of the most anticipated functions from account abstractions, right? So for smart accounts, ERC 4337 is expected to bring in something called group asset wallets. So this means if you lose your seed phrase, you can reach out to previously designated Guardian contracts or accounts to help retrieve access. So will there be potential trust issues with the Guardians?
Yeah, so I do believe that just like, this thing can happen on chain or off chain, and regardless, there will always be trust issues, right? Like it really comes down to, do you trust the set of people that you rely on to recover your key, right? And so at the end of the day, and we're seeing that even with governance for protocols, right? Like you can have like governance attacks and things that kind of like, that can happen by multiple, participants of a quorum getting, hacked or turning malicious. It just happens. And so I do believe that it's going to be on, because you're going to essentially, as a user, you're going to need to make a choice about who do you trust and how many people do you trust, and like in which circles, etc. Right? Like you can think like, okay, I want like my two parents, I want my lawyer, I want my wife, you kind of like, you name it. But the idea is, again, it's going to be very hard for the vast majority of the people on Earth essentially to make an educated decision about like what makes sense from a security standpoint. Like it's even something that is hard for me to judge really without taking a closer look as a security expert. And so the way I think about it is that wallet providers, or whichever business essentially integrates with it and represents this kind of front line on the user experience, is going to need to provide defaults that are secure and, and doesn't kind of, authorize a choice for the vast majority of the users, right? The idea being that the vast majority of technology, whether that's your iPhone, whether that's your email, essentially works with security by default, right? Where the defaults are secure enough for 99% of the people. And if it creates some friction for the remaining 0.1%, it is fine. It's a good trade-off to have, as a business essentially, and as a space, right? If you think about DeFi and kind of like bridges, those things should be a lot more secure by default, right? Even though it would allow kind of like a bit like a slower innovation, it would be good for the space. And I do think that it's probably the same for wallets, that should probably go much slower in terms of kind of innovation, but always ensuring that no one gets hacked in the process. That way you can really build this trust in the space.
Got it. I remember you mentioned another newfound ability by Account Abstraction is the ability to create a non-custodial wallet without needing to keep track of your private keys, right? But I remember reading your article, Wallet Security, the non-custodial fallacy. You mentioned that non-custodial wallets do not really put users in full control of their keys. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so like the non-custodial fallacy is actually a very important concept that like most people need to understand. And I think that last year we actually saw the actual proof of it kind of like happen in real time. I don't know if you guys remember, there was like this kind of time on Solana where like everyone on Twitter was saying like, I'm getting drained, I don't know what's going on, my wallet is getting drained.
Yeah.
And everyone was using self-custodial wallets, right? In when you think about what a wallet is, and that at the end of the day, this is a combination of a secret or a set of secrets, but also code that actually allows the usage, the protection and the usage of this secret. The code is essentially written by other people that are not, that are not you, that are, companies. And what happened with the Slope hack was essentially just that. It was a self-custodial wallet, but the company that was implementing the software actually logged all the private keys whenever there was an error on the device, which happened fairly often, apparently. And so they were actually just like logging all the private keys and then like putting that in log servers. And then obviously they had the keys. They have all the seed phrases, all the keys, all their users. And so there, it doesn't matter if, even if you have a multi-sig, like you two guys have a multi-sig and like both of your private keys get uploaded into like a logging server that gets compromised, it doesn't matter, like the key is not really yours because the software that protects it and uses it is not yours. So it's not a binary, like a binary kind of like situation. It's very much a spectrum, right? And you can do a lot of things to keep the software secure and do many things. For example, like a Ledger wallet, the software only gets updated very rarely, and the vast majority of the software that lives on a Ledger hardware Ledger hardware wallet actually doesn't have access to the key. The amount of code that actually has access to the key is very minimal and gets updated extremely rarely. And so I think that it's very important for people to understand this kind of distinction, that non-custodial, so long as your wallet is connected and online, is actually a pretty weak kind of protection versus, custodial. I think that like custodial is actually pretty interesting from that standpoint, and I'm personally a big fan essentially of kind of custodial wallets that can work also with account abstraction, that can work with on-chain key recovery mechanisms, etc. Right? It's not black or white again, and so I do believe that a lot of people kind of make this distinction between non-custodial and custodial without thinking, is the key always in my control? No, because like the software that accesses it is not mine.
I kind of agree with you on that point because when it comes to mass adoption, non-custodial wallet come with risks, right? So me as like just a general customer wouldn't be willing to take that risk, because if I gave my custodian wallet to some of the business, they could probably have some backup solutions that I don't have to take the risk of it. In that article, you actually gave like couple things about keys. So my question would kind of be, what problem is account abstraction solving when it comes to the key generation, key storage, and key usage?
That's a great question. So in terms of key generation, so again, you can have account abstraction that really help you with a seamless multi-sig, for like multi-sig setup that really backs kind of like a single wallet. And we are seeing Gnosis and Argent and kind of like a bunch of other wallets already doing that. Like essentially this is a form of account abstraction to have like on-chain multi-sig, right? It's multiple people kind of like having to come together to get transactions or actions by a wallet approved. And so I personally put that in the kind of account abstraction bucket, and so certainly really helping making key generation more distributed and more secure. In terms of key storage, exactly the same thing. You can actually have a setup where multiple people will get to store the keys in very distributed locations, but not just locations, but also in terms of, as we mentioned, kind of like the type of hardware that stores them, the type of software, who writes the software, that kind of protects those keys, having that also be, different per key share, quote unquote, right? Or key quorum participants. So I think that those things are pretty important. But also, as we discussed, kind of like the key recovery piece is also very interesting, because when you think about key generation, at the end of the day, it also includes the ability to rotate keys and to actually recover keys that may have been lost. And so from that perspective, having not just quorum for the usage of an account, but also quorums for the recovery of those keys is going to be pretty important. And so obviously that comes with trade-offs on the privacy perspective, because now your policy of like how many people need to come together and which addresses have to come together is visible to everyone, right? Unless you actually use some privacy, like a kind of on-chain privacy setup. So that's the reason actually why some of the people try to push towards like MPC, like off-chain, to have kind of like a multi, and it kind of like we can touch on that later, but really kind of like pushing off-chain more of this logic. That way you don't essentially have to expose to the rest of the world like, hey, this is how many people it takes essentially to access my key, and those are the wallet owners. And in terms of key usage, this is the most important. Like getting keys to work is really the biggest point of friction in the space. I really feel like, as you were mentioning, the vast majority of the people want to have Web2 experiences, right? Like I want to swipe, on my social networks and just get the information about like who's doing what, and like just seeing people dance and like seeing, and you name it, without or subscribing to products and without having to kind of like resign. I want to play games without having to kind of constantly like approve pop-ups from my MetaMask, right? Like that's not acceptable as a UX. And so really account abstraction alongside off-chain components can really work really hand in hand to have those kind of like recurring approvals under certain conditions that you were mentioning, right? Like if you think about subscription, if you think about, even when you authenticate on Nike.com, you have like a session that allows you to just use the website without constantly to having to re-log in for like, say, 20, 30 minutes plus, right? And like at some point, this thing is going to expire. And account abstraction should work in that sense. It should say like, for the next like X blocks or like however kind of like many, because on Ethereum it's like easier because it's now like a clock every 12 seconds that we're getting a new block, so it's actually pretty easy to kind of evaluate time durations. But for other chains that might not be the case. But essentially having some form of like recurring approval that really will allow the vast majority of the Web3 the Web2 like experiences that we're so used to.
So you also mentioned account abstraction is still very much in development, right? One of the alternatives that have been frequently discussed is MPC wallets. And people say MPC wallets can work alongside with account abstraction to provide users with a secure key management system. What are your thoughts on that?
MPC, HSM, just like Quorum based, I think that anything essentially that really makes the key generation and transaction approval process more robust is extremely important. I do believe that when it comes to MPC, it's just like account abstraction. I feel like this is kind of like this is used very often. It's kind of like a buzzword that kind of encompasses a bunch of different things. There are many ways to do it well, and there are even more ways to do it wrong. And so, and have seen kind of like a lot of the wrong way to do it. And so I do believe that it really, whether we're talking about MPC, whether we're talking about, kind of like code signing enforced, like quorum based approval, really secure key management systems should and will work hand in hand with on-chain code, aka account abstractions, to really provide seamless experiences, right? The idea is you have kind of like a code that lives off the chain that is not really chain agnostic, but can really apply and scale really well across multiple chains. And then you essentially have the on-chain code, the account abstraction, or kind of like, on-chain wallet that really will take full advantage of the native blockchain features of this ecosystem. And those things should always work together as much as possible. It's very interesting. For example, the account abstraction thing that, the kind of concept that we're seeing today on Ethereum being standardized now, actually were part of the default design on Libra, for example. Like on Libra, you had key recovery, multiple key recovery mechanisms available natively by default. And it was just something that you could just integrate with your wallet. Whereas here, it might require you to run both on-chain code and off-chain code. So those things are very interesting. When it comes to MPC, I just want to kind of, for those who don't know what MPC is, MPC is multi-party computation. The reality is that for what we actually use, it's a very broad space. And it involves kind of like signing and encryption and a bunch of other things. What we actually use in this space is called DKG and TSS, which is distributed key generation, but also threshold signing schemes. And so the part that is very important there to note is that this is essentially the ability for multiple people at the cryptographic level to be able to generate a key across multiple locations without each one of those, by multiple parties, without each one of those parties revealing any information, any sensitive information to other parties, which means that those parties can independently generate a key, get to an agreement, like this is going to be part of the same kind of like top level public key without sharing any sensitive information.
Right.
And that also goes for approving transactions and key usage. And so this is, as we were saying, like there might be a way to do kind of on-chain quorum. There might be a way to do off-chain quorum. MPC doesn't solve all the problems. Again, you need to be able to run the MPC on probably, you probably want different software between the different parties. As we said, you know, it really comes down to the software that you're running. So really different software there, but also, you know, the code that essentially says specifically those parties need to come together, or like this amount of party needs to come together, is centralized. That's essentially the piece where, you know, MPC is not fully kind of, you know, distributed. There will be parts of it that will be very centralized and protected by generally a unique key. But the idea is to really kind of reduce this this piece to kind of like an initial setup, and then having all the rest distributed. But very excited essentially to see both off-chain and on-chain components work together for just better UX. That is what we need as a space. This is what everyone should be focused on, really making sure that people get to use Web3 products without even knowing it.
Definitely.
Right.
That's kind of like onboarding the next billion people. It's very essential to that, right?
The idea is that you don't even want to onboard them. You want it to be so invisible that it doesn't feel like an onboarding. It feels like
Definitely.
no up, right? Like the idea is really for people to just wake up one day and you can tell them like, hey, you have actually been using, you know, blockchain, kind of like Web3 components behind the scenes for like all along, and now you can actually go ahead and, you know, sell them or just go do more outside of the ecosystem. Enjoy, you know.
I think Reddit is doing pretty well on that part with their NFTs avatars, right?
Yeah, I think the part that I'm very excited there is, you know, it's pretty critical essentially to create, I do believe, kind of like communities that are not necessarily tied to central platforms. Obviously, I do feel like the entire Web3 space right now is still on Twitter, and that without
Right.
Twitter, you know, we would have an extremely hard time. But it is going to take time, right? Like if you think about blockchain networks, they're just networks, right? And so it's not different from email. It's not different from mobile, like kind of like cellular networks. All of those networks, no one knows. Like if I ask you guys, like, how does like email protocol and networks work, or how does kind of like TCP/IP work? Like the vast majority of the people are not going to be able to answer, and they should not be able to, and they should not know, you know. And I feel like this is exactly what should happen with kind of like blockchain-based network. At the end of the day, you should just be able to independently be able to access experiences, goods, assets, you know, trade, whatever action you may want to do without the end user knowing about it.
I heard rumors about Elon Musk with this new X.com will probably do something about, you know, wallets and blockchain and stuff, but like people are just still guessing about it right now.
Let's see, I mean, like I worked on the Facebook, like transparently, I've worked on the Facebook, you know, version of the wallet. I do believe that Facebook has been doing social and communities like a lot better than Twitter. And so, and I'm not, I'm not a Facebook CEO, right? Like I don't have like the skin in the game of like other people, but I'm saying that I really do believe that it will really come from companies that understand, you know, culture really well, that understand communities really well. And the hard part there is really going to give them the incentive to give more freedom to their users, right? To kind of like say, because the vast majority of the companies have created amazing businesses by building closed ecosystems, right? Like if you are Facebook, you don't win, you know, in kind of like the social landscape by building a platform that is completely open. You
Mhm.
build kind
Right.
of like an ecosystem that feels good to live inside and just interact inside, right? And this is why you cannot send messages from like Messenger, Instagram, etc., to people that don't have like a Facebook account and are not on Facebook. And so the part that I'm very excited about is how do we think as a space to provide the incentives for major companies that have the user distribution to essentially give the freedom to the users? Because right now, Facebook doesn't really have like a strong incentive to allow their users to buy things on Facebook and like do more outside of Facebook with it. And so I'm very excited for more incentives being provided for those companies.
Well, I kind of want to go back to account abstraction here a little bit. You know, you mentioned like it's a buzzword, right? We've seen like hundreds of thousands of projects that is currently building wallets that, you know, so-called account abstraction wallets. What advice do you have for the, you know, newer entrepreneurs or developers when they're trying to build a wallet at this point? Because it seems to me like it's so competitive. And how can a founder differentiate themselves from all those competitors? What's like the key important things for such projects? Is this something like heavily related to marketing teams, or is it something like more related to technology or like better UI? Like which component do you see is the most important for a team?
The way I see wallets, honestly, is I do believe that wallets to a certain extent are going to become a commodity. Like if you think about wallets as credit cards, right? And like you just happen to have a credit card that you can actually use in very open networks without having to go to, you know, an ATM or Visa. You don't need to like put it in like a you know, like a Square reader. Now you can actually just connect your credit card directly to the network and interact and transfer and transact, etc. And so if you think about it that way, and if you see how the credit card space has evolved, creating and issuing credit cards is not a business. This is essentially a mean to an end. If you think about Visa, they don't make money by selling the credit cards, right? They make money by building the infrastructure that that really underpins the usage and the activity to really enable the activity of those wallets. And so anything that, you know, wallet folks can do to essentially make it easier to transact, to really improve not just the UX, but really the incentives for people to transact through those wallets is going to be absolutely critical. And so that's something that, you know, Riaz and I have been working on for a tremendous amount of time and kind of like have spoken to every single person in the space. And so I do believe that this is essentially what will happen. We've been, you know, kind of like taking this position for a very long time that wallets are going to become a commodity. They already are, right? But the part that is very important is kind of the infrastructure that leaves behind that really provides the incentives, because this is where, if you think about Starbucks, Visa, PayPal, you know, Venmo, etc., this is where all of those companies have built, you know, massive businesses, right? It's actually the like providing incentives for the usage of those you know, wallets, which are just credit cards.
So like loyalty
Right.
programs and stuff.
Exactly. So I think that it's, you know, at the end of the day, the marketing is critical. Having a great technology is critical as well. The UX is, you know, paramount, but does it mean that this is what the business should be? I'm not sure.
One last question, Jojo, do you want to ask about like the ex-CISO startup school?
Oh yeah, so actually we saw that you have attended Andreessen Horowitz Startup School. So we were just wondering if you could share some insights from the sessions. You know, what are developers building nowadays? What leading investors are looking forward to the most, and also any particular projects you have seen that are, you know, that really catch your interest.
Yeah. So I'm very thankful. A16Z invited, you know, Riaz and myself actually to give the security session there, and so we presented, you know, about all things about security. I think that for a lot of people in this space, security is kind of tied to like smart contract hacks and kind of like DeFi and bridge hacks, etc. And so the goal there was really to actually demystify that and show that there were massive kind of like 9 digits kind of like hacks in this space that were not due whatsoever about smart contract, that had nothing to do with anything Web3 related. That's just good old kind of like Web2 security. If you think about, Badger DAO, for example, which was a Cloudflare key that got compromised, which resulted in like a fake front end where everyone started kind of, going to Badger DAO's kind of like front end and transacting, actually sending to the hacker's wallet. Or if you think about, the Ronin hack, which actually was pure kind of like key management, that the North Korean group called Lazarus actually managed to get their hands on, to actually compromise the entire bridge. Like all of those things, yeah. Like and I was like, I was part of like the incident response on it. Like it's just like you wake up, it's like 4 a.m. It's like, Nass, where are you? Just like you have to come over and like we gotta save this. And so there, at the end of the day, being in Web3 and doing security in Web3 means that you have to take care of all the security of Web2 plus all the new threats of Web3. It's like you got it all, right? And so I do think that like it's very important for every startup to realize that. And that was kind of like the main topic of the session. There were great sessions essentially that actually build more parallels with like TCP/IP and kind of like other networks, as I just mentioned, but also explain where the value accrued around those kind of like, I would say, kind of like backbone networks, right? Like over time, we were talking about like TCP/IP. If you were talking about cellular networks, etc., how did those kind of network actually brought value to businesses that started building kind of different components around those, right? And so whether you're talking about like physical infrastructure, whether you're talking about logical infrastructure, and so it's just very interesting to kind of some of the sessions were really drawing amazing parallels with essentially history of technology, because we're just in one of the many great kind of like innovation windows of human, like the human beings in general, just tackling new problems and building technology to solve those problems. So this is where that was like extremely interesting. There was also kind of like additional great sessions on how to think through tokenomics. I think that a lot of people have like a very hard time kind of like wrapping their head around how do I build strong tokenomics for for a protocol. And obviously we've seen unfortunately a lot of the poorly structured kind of like tokenomics result in mass issues last year. And so it's very critical essentially to teach this as really a new, it's going to be a new science, right? Like there has been kind of like tokenomics for a while, but not as pushed as because now the money becomes programmable. You can do anything with the money, right? Like your dollar is like fully programmable. And so it's going to be very interesting to have this new science within economics of like, how do you really build completely open network where people can participate in the governance, make if the essentially the logic, the programmable logic of assets and financial assets evolve over time. It's going to be very interesting for just regular fiat currencies, but also other types of financial instruments, right? Like whether you're talking about bonds, whether you're talking in treasury bonds, whether you're talking about other derivatives. Like there's going to be a tremendous amount of impact for the global markets over time, because it's just a much more efficient way to represent assets and to track assets and to trade them, right? It's kind of now all of the assets in the world evolve and can kind of move at internet speed, right? And really evolve in terms of programmability. So very excited about that. So yeah, there were like a tremendous amount of interest in those sessions. It's an amazing program that is being built by A16Z, led by my previous coworkers there, and I'm very excited for great, startups to essentially learn not everything, right? Like there are a lot of things that are just gonna happen on the job, and like there is no other way. But so many, there were even kind of like forums that were putting in relationship like many ecosystems leaders with the startups to understand what does it mean to build within ecosystem X or Y or Z, right? And so really putting in close touch and like very small like settings, the people who want to build projects and the people who have been fostering amazing ecosystems, whether that's Solana, whether that's Aptos, whether that's others, really having kind of like a close proximity between those is going to be extremely important for the success of the space. So yeah, very interesting. And in terms of the projects that I'm very, very interested in, I think that it was actually extremely broad. The amount of great things being built, whether that's for security around, wallet or protocols, or whether that's kind of like CRM aspects, right? Like I think that the CRM piece is going to be extremely important for the future, and that kind of like ties back to the incentive piece for businesses that I was mentioning before. There will be a huge need essentially for just much better analytics and kind of like CRM solutions in the space. So that's also something that I'm extremely interested about. They were all selected to be part of this program because they're amazing. They're extremely hungry to succeed and to make this space essentially just a much better ecosystem. So I'm very excited. Overall, I actually ended up meeting multiple people that I already knew, like across the entire space, and just like ended up seeing them there, and was very excited with the A16Z within the A16Z location. That was very nice. So yeah, I'm extremely bullish about this space. I'm very bullish about the market in general. I think that there are two different markets. There are like the market of prices, and there is the market of technology building. And I think that we're actually in a great place when it comes to technology building. I joined the kind of the Web3 space right after the like right at the kind of like ICO kind of like crash, and it was amazing. The space is dead quiet. There is no distraction. You can just like go ahead and write code, from like morning to night, and like you can just build, and that's going to be great. So I'm very excited for whenever things pick up and like the general interest kind of, and we're ready. We have to be ready and just show for it that like we are ready and that we build a technology that deserves the next level of adoption.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for all the insights. And also, since you're here, you also mentioned you have experienced kind of the gap that we mentioned between the East and West. And, you have met so many founders. And also, I think from the A16Z startup school, I myself didn't see a lot of these founders from the East. So can you kind of elaborate on your experience on the gap and how you think, we can potentially solve it?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I think that this is really something that we need to tackle. And I'm so happy that you guys are, first identify the gap, but second are really actively working towards bridging it. Because if you think about it, it actually is something that appears at like every single level, whether we're talking about kind of whether we're talking about kind of contributions in terms of code and kind of like participation within different ecosystems, whether we're talking about from a regulatory standpoint, it's extremely, kind of like the regulatory climate and like speed and I would say kind of appetite is extremely different. And in general, you have like a lot of companies like in the US that will first say like, hey, there's like a lot of problems in the in this market. I'm first going to try to kind of like get all my licensing kind of like straight, or whatever kind of like constraints you have to deal with from a regulatory standpoint in the US, and then I'm going to tackle like Europe, and then I will try to understand like what is going on in the different parts of Asia, right? Because obviously India is very different from Philippines, which is very different from Hong Kong, and so like I do believe that from a regulatory standpoint, this is something that actually kind of like the differences between the different regions within Asia is actually kind of like frightening, and that companies that are like in whether in the US or in Europe are actually going to take a lot more time to kind of like engage with the markets there, which might leave actually opportunity for people that are there and building, right? But
Yeah.
I do think that there isn't much kind of efforts from a regulatory standpoint to provide some form of interoperability when it comes to regulatory frameworks. So, something that, for example, like a license that would work kind of like in location, outside of Asia, but also in Asia would actually be great, or like some form of interoperability between the frameworks. In terms of kind of from an investment perspective, I do like I've seen kind of like VCs. I'm not talking about A16Z. I'm talking just like in general, because I'm pretty close to a lot of VC firms within the Web3 space. I do believe that and it's probably also because the market like evolves so quickly and that the technology evolves so quickly, that it's just very hard essentially for people who are in the US or who are in Europe to try to look outward, right? Like if you were like a VC in the US, it's already hard enough to have visibility over the European markets, for example.
Right.
And let alone, kind of like in all the different, markets within APAC. So that's something that I do believe is going to take more time, for American and like European firms to get like strong enough of an understanding of the markets there to be able to invest as much as they wish. But the vast majority of the people, if you think about it, like the vast majority of people on Earth are in Asia, and so there needs to be essentially infrastructure to support great experiences for people, in various countries across various markets and regulatory regimes there. So yeah, I do believe that it's going to take a lot of time. I also do think that NFTs really could help a lot there, because the idea is that NFTs are really here to, as we discussed, kind of like building communities outside of social platforms, outside or across social platforms, across kind of like ecosystems that might be owned by corporations, right? And so that really helps connect people across markets, regions, you name it, like however you want to kind of like segment things. That's really an opportunity. But then the culture aspect and the language needs to be like a barrier, needs to be one of the reasons why I'm actually extremely excited about AI, because like AI would actually be able to really have, if you think about like communication on Discord or like other mediums, having kind of like automated translation, not just kind of like word for word, but really with the intent being understood, is going to be absolutely critical. I'm saying that because it was very funny. I was using a GPT 4 for the translation of like slang, with the intention that I had to communicate with my wife's family that speaks Hebrew, and I speak English, and so I wanted to kind of like convey kind of like the intent with and the kind of like level of language that I was using, because Google Translate, it does an awful job at it, and so that's why I'm so excited about it. I really believe that we're going to be able to break down a lot of barriers there, and really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing.
One last thing. There's not only like VC money wise when it comes to the gap, but also we got like really talented developers here in Asia, right? I don't know if your stealth startup is still looking for talent, but like if a listener wanted to get in touch with you, how would they be in touch with you? And
Yeah, we're actively hiring. So right now I'm mostly focused on top tier engineers. If you are extremely talented as an engineer, like around staff, senior staff level, please reach out. We want to hire the best people wherever they are. We have the best investors. We have a lot of money. We have the best people within the team, and so very excited to grow the team by hiring essentially just more amazing people. And yeah, that's really, please get in touch, DMs, LinkedIn, whatever whatever works best for you. I hope that I didn't butcher like the answers to various questions. Like quite a bit of stuff happening behind the scenes,
It was
but
nice.
yeah.
It was nice.
It's such a great session. I mean, I've learned a lot from you, especially, on kind of how to think from a broader perspective, other than just, we're building wallet, that's it. But
That's something that like we thought about so much. I think that a lot of people kind of are too zoomed in, and
yeah.
like think about like technology too much. But at the end of the day, like I spend the vast majority of my time kind of like reading about like history of technology, because that really helps you kind of like understand like major trends, right? Across like decades of evolution of credit card industry, payment industry, and mobile industry. And I do think that it's going to be critical for us
Yeah.
to take a step back, like often, especially like in this market.
Yeah, I mean, you really surprised me because I thought you came from like a really technical background and you were like the CISO of A16Z, right? So I thought you would, comment on a lot of the in-depth technical questions, but you also brought up a lot of the ideas in marketing, growth, and like human nature and everything. So it's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, for sure. Security is all about this. I have like a good point that like people like don't realize in this space around like private, like for private keys. Super interesting. So like I used to work at Apple, and
Right.
so I saw kind of like the transition of like pre to post Touch ID on the phones. And so the part that was very interesting is that before Touch ID, only I believe that it was like only like 10% of people with an iPhone were actually using the PIN to block the access to their phone. And with the Touch ID, it actually rose instantly to 96%, which
Wow.
is like kind of like touches on the security. Everything about it is like about human behaviors. Everything about it is about user security, user experience, and everything about it is about kind of like secure by default. Like when they realized that like it was like 96%, they were like, okay, we got it. Now we can enforce it for everyone. Like it's impossible to bypass it. And then it didn't make a problem,
I was just wondering, like, because you were saying you were reading a lot of the history of technology. Do you have any books or articles you recommend us to read?
Yeah, I can share that. It's electronic value exchange or origins of the Visa electronic payment systems. There are like a bunch of other things that I've been reading, essentially kind of like the history around like PayPal, like Visa, Venmo, kind of like other great books. Even if you think about what's it called? I think it's Behind the Cloud, which is actually like very tactical like book from Mark Benioff about like how he started and how he built Salesforce. It's also extremely interesting because like before Salesforce, everyone was using CDs. Everyone was selling CDs that had that had software on it, right? And so for him, Salesforce was like the main company that was doing cloud-based kind of like software. So everything was revolving around no software. They were calling it like the no software movement. And like Salesforce is also very interesting because they kind of like moved everything from like disks being put inside machines and mainframes to like actually cloud services and like cloud SaaS. So those, all those things are like, things that we need to learn from. And I really do believe that the more people kind of take a step back, understand trends, what makes sense, what drives adoption, when we're talking about a major major kind of like technology like transformation is really going to be valuable for us.
Thank you so much, Nass.
Cool.
Have a great weekend.
I appreciate it.
Have a good
All
one.
right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you very soon.
Bye.